I will be honest. Generally speaking, this is one of the more challenging units that we address. Right. So I'm giving you an easier worksheet, okay? And we're starting with just a basic review, and then you're going to get notes on Monday. And we'll spend some time next week. The good news is that we really only need to cover two topics. Number one, we're going to solve trig equations, and number two, we're going to reduce identities, and you'll see what that means in a little bit. But I want to refresh your mind to some of the identities that we have. And so up here, I'm going to have you write a few that we've learned before. We'll see if you can remember. We've learned that sine squared of theta plus cosine squared of theta is equal to 1. You guys remember that? We had those formula sheets where we had some of those written down. We had another one that said 1 plus tangent squared of theta is equal to secant squared. And we had one more, 1 plus cotangent squared is equal to cosecant squared. Okay? Remember those? A little bit? And that's why we're spending a little bit of time of review. And we had these problems, and it was actually it's something that we kind of used to prepare for your final exam. And it'll be neat because the second time that you learn this, you might actually find it easier. What we wanted to do is we wanted to identify these 6 trigonometric ratios given certain conditions. Okay? So we know that sine of theta is equal to 3/5. So I want to fill out these pieces. Which one do I know? Obviously, sine is 3/5. Which other one do I then obviously know right away? Cosecant is 5/3. Good. We got 2 out of the 6. That was easy. Now, I'm going to try to find cosine. So I'm going to use this formula right here to find cosine. Sine squared of theta plus cosine squared of theta is equal to 1. What is sine of theta? 3/5. What do you get if you square 3/5? 9/25. Very good. I'm going to turn 1 into 25ths. How would I write 1 as fractions? 25/25. What do I do now? I subtract the 9/25. I get cosine squared of theta is equal to, what's 25/25? Minus 9/25. 16/25. How do I get rid of the squared? Square root. Cosine of theta is equal to, what's the square root of 16? 4. Square root of 25. Cosine of theta is 4/5. Plus or minus. We don't know which one it is. Remember how we decide whether it's positive 4/5 or negative 4/5? Quadrants, very good. Which quadrant am I working in? The first quadrant. If I'm in the first quadrant, they're all positive, correct? So is it positive 4/5 or negative 4/5? What other number do I know now too? Or what other ratio? Secant is 5/4. How do I find tangent? We've got 2 options. Now, Cass, did you just say 1 plus tan squared is secant squared? Okay, good. but I'm going to give you another formula that you maybe don't remember. Sine of theta over cosine of theta is equal to tangent of theta. So Cass is right. You can use 1 plus tangent squared is secant squared. Or you can use sine over cosine as tangent. What is sine? 3/5. What is cosine? How do I divide two fractions? Multiply by the reciprocal. So times 5/4. 5's cancel and I get 3/4. If I know tangent is 3/4, what is cotangent? What do you think? You remember that? A little bit? Not real good, but you remember it a little bit, don't you? Doesn't seem as impossible as it did before. When we did it before, it took like 2 days, and we were still like, I'm not sure I know what's going on. Now, I bet we could probably have some really good success. So let's start with 2. Tangent is 15/8. Which other one do I know? Cotangent is 8/15. Very good. Cassie had a question. All students take calculus. And so we'll do that, okay? We'll write that down here in a second. But first, I am going to use my formula that involves tangent, okay? 1 plus tangent squared is equal to secant squared. One plus, good. So Isa is going to square 15/8. 15 squared is 225, and 8 squared is equal to secant squared of theta. Oh, let's change that 1 into a fraction. 64/64. Okay, 64 plus 225/64. 289/64. What do I do to both sides? Square root. I get plus or minus, what's the square root of 289? Over 8 is equal to secant of theta. I need to know if it's positive or negative. Now, my good friend Cass, you guys know Cass? Say hi, Cass. Cass said what did you say again? It was so clever. She said all students take calculus. That's great. And we know that not all students do take calculus, but we want all students to go on and take calculus someday. That'd be great. It's a great subject. So that means that sine is positive here, tangent is positive here, and cosine is positive here. Let's look at what we have. Is tangent positive or negative? Positive. Tangent is positive in the first quadrant and in the third quadrant. Cosecant is positive or negative? If cosecant is less than 0, does that mean it's positive or it's negative? It's negative. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So where is sine negative? Third and the fourth. So which quadrant am I working in? The one where tangent is positive and cosecant is negative, the third quadrant. So we know is in the third quadrant, is tangent positive or negative? How about cosine and secant? How about sine and cosecant? Negative. Yep. So we've already decided our signs. We know those now. So secant will be negative 17/8, we decided. And cosine will be 8/17. Very good, Mitzi. Now we know a cosine is negative 8/17. What I can do now is I can find sine. And I'll choose to do my sine squared plus cosine squared is equal to 1. If I square a negative, it becomes positive. What's 8 squared? 64 over 289. Change my 1 to 289 over 289. What do I do then? Subtract. I get sine squared is 289 minus 64, 225. When I square root both sides, as you said, I get sine of theta is plus or minus 15 over 17. So we know it's negative. We decided that. And for cosecant, I flip it. Now, when I say easier, you guys, I mean that I picked numbers that work out to rational numbers, meaning there are no radicals. There's no square root of 2 over 2. And I think that's what confused you the first time. And I didn't do a very good job of kind of bridging that gap. So I rewrote an easier worksheet. So that's why we're doing that. And that way I can, when I go to select the worksheet, I can remember what I should do first. Because I'll teach this course again in the spring then. So, okay. All right, last one. Cosecant -4. So what else do you know? Let's figure out what quadrant we're in right away. Which quadrants is sine negative? 3 and 4. Is tangent positive or negative? Negative because it's less than 0. Which quadrant is tangent negative? 4 and 2. So which quadrant am I working in? The fourth quadrant, the one where both of those things happen. So what's positive in the fourth quadrant? Cosine's positive and secant's positive. The others are negative. That's kind of tricky, isn't it? But that's a good skill. We practiced before. All right, let's do the first one. Let's find sine. What's sine squared? What's negative 1 over 4 squared? 16. I'm going to change 1 to a fraction. What fraction should I change it to? What do I do to both sides? So cosine squared is equal to 15 over 16. And now I square root. Cosine of theta is equal to, I put one in there with a radical. That's because we had practiced two that didn't. Can you take the square root of 15? No, so we write plus or minus the square root of 15. Can you take the square root of 16? What do you get? 4, yeah. So it's okay to have square root of 15 over 4, isn't it? So I have cosine is positive square root of 15 over 4. What do I do for secant? I flip it and I get 4 over. Are you allowed to have the square root in the denominator? So very good. Hannah says I multiply by the square root of 15. So we get 4 roots of 15 over 15. Would you like to use the 1 plus tangent squared formula, or would you like to use sine divided by cosine formula? Okay, we'll use sine divided by cosine. So negative 1 over 4 divided by square root of 15 over 4. How do I divide by two fractions? Times by the reciprocal. The 4's cancel. And pause. Let me save you some time. We don't like that that's square roots in the denominator, do we? But before we change it, let's just say that tangent's negative 1 over the square root of 15, right? How would I find cotangent? I would, if we flip it, the square root is out of the denominator, right? So we already got cotangent, square root of 15 over 1, or square root of 15. So see how I noticed that? That way I didn't have to switch it later. Now, tangent is 1, negative 1 over the square root of 15. So I multiply top and bottom by. And we get negative root of 15 over 15. Do you get my point, folks? That if you would not have written cotangent, that then when you flip this, you would have had a radical in the denominator. It's just easy to look at it right away. So if that saves you some time, then great. So I want you guys to know that this Friday, I didn't want to cover just a ton of material. I wanted to cover something that was somewhat familiar. And I have two problems that don't involve radicals, and I have two that do involve radicals. And so all I want you to do is just these four. You've got 15 minutes to be working right now. And my guess is you could for sure get done problems 1 and 2. But so this will be your first assignment. We didn't take any notes to do it. We did the examples on the front. You'll be good to go. Okay? You sure can.